2 weeks ago, we were discussing the launch of Stop Starmer, and Dr. Bob Gill came onto the show, and also Nicholas Sorogo, who's a representative who is in the Socialist Health Association, came on as well. During that discussion, I pointed out to Nicholas and to Dr. Bob that I had received a message that day or the day before from a representative of the Socialist Health Association about Nicholas's participation, and this is what they wrote. Hello, Crispin. Mark Ladbrook here, Chair SHA. Since 1931, the SHA has been a Labour affiliate. We believe a Labour government is an urgent necessity. We cannot and do not back candidates standing against Labour. Now, I read that out, and then a response came to that from Dr. Bob Gill. Now, the context of this is, as I say, we were discussing that we need to stop Starmer because Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting have both been saying they want to outsource more of the NHS to private companies. They've also urged the government to speed up outsourcing. So there's no question that the Labour Party is threatening the NHS. So why should we not challenge Streeting and Starmer on that, and also possibly say, well, we shouldn't vote for them if they're going to do that? Dr. Bob Gill's response, I'm just going to play you a clip that went out on social media of Dr. Bob Gill's response. Then I'm going to bring on Dr. Bob Gill and Cassie Perry to talk about this.
Just imagine, why should these groups be any different than the Labour Party? You have lots of good people within them, but the right wing tend to be more ruthless and savvy and assume the positions of power. Within the SHA, there's a gentleman called Dr. Brian Fisher, who I got to know through the Save Lewisham Hospital campaign, who personally has interest in private healthcare. And he was formerly, I believe, co-chair of the SHA. So you couldn't make this stuff up. You have somebody who's earning money from privatized healthcare in the echelons of the Socialist Health Association. This is insane. When Corbyn was in power, all these groups, the People's Assembly, Keep Our NHS Public, all the health unions, didn't do a thing to extend public understanding of what's happening to the NHS. All they drone on about is more money and Labour's better than the Tories. That's not good enough. They are largely responsible for the imposed ignorance of the population. I've spent a decade trying to get this message across. It's not a complicated message to tell the public that our NHS is being taken over by American corporations and will be run like an insurance company. That's not a complicated message. Yet all these organizations have failed to make any impression in the public conscience. Now, either they are supremely incompetent or there's something else going on.
Right, I'm joined, as I say, by Dr. Bob Gill and Cassie Perry. Thank you, Cassie. You were part of the SHA, a director, is that right, of the SHA?
That's right.
You're not anymore. And Bob, now I just wanted to say, before I talk to you, I just want to follow up a little bit on this, because I invited members of the SHA, Keep Our NHS Public and People's Assembly to come on to the show to respond to what Dr. Bob said. This was an email I received from Tom Griffith of the Keep Our NHS Public. He says, thanks for the invitation, but we decline. Dr. Gill has been unrelentlessly hostile and accusatory over the years, including accusing us of being an astroturf organisation promoting privatisation. He studiously avoids the evidence of our non-stop campaigning for a wholly public NHS over many years. Whilst we have shared a platform with Dr. Gill on more than one occasion, we think that people who claim to be fighting for our NHS should not be wasting valuable energy and resources arguing with each other over baseless slurs, when we should focus our energies on holding those in power to account. Last of all, I think our record on fighting against privatisation and for a fully restored NHS for the benefit of all speaks for itself, as does our non-aligned stance in criticising those parties pursuing policies damaging to the NHS. I've already shared our demands for all opposition parties, including Labour. If you're interested in holding another session on NHS issues, perhaps we can discuss. I would also like to repeat my request that you remove the untruthful and divisive video referred to in my previous email. Thanks. Now, further to that, I'll just say something else. I wanted to find out what is Keep Our NHS Public doing on showing up the Labour Party as well as the Conservatives on this issue. So I looked at their Twitter feed over the past month and a half, and this is what I see on their Twitter feed. This is the most recent one. Privatisation is killing the NHS. More than a decade of privatisation and underfunding has left the NHS on its knees. Right, so that's saying that over just a decade of privatisation and underfunding has left the NHS on its knees, and the decade would coincide with the Conservatives being in government. There's a retweet here of the size of NHS waiting list. It shows it going down with Labour and going up with the Conservatives. So it's clearly making a party point there that the Conservatives are worse than Labour on the NHS. Then this one here, this government in a nutshell: incompetent, uncaring, not fit to govern. That's your money they're wasting. Make sure you vote them out when the time comes. That's clearly saying vote against the Conservatives and suggesting to vote Labour. I don't think that's much of a leap to say that. Then this is a bit further back, August the 4th. With a general election looming, we're calling on everyone to get involved and keep our NHS public. We'll be campaigning harder than ever to ensure our NHS remains free at the point of use by holding all parties to account. So that's pretty much the first mention of holding all parties to account in the month. That's August the 4th. It's the 27th of August today. And this one is July the 17th. I went back to then. And I think this is quite telling. I'm really excited to be speaking tonight at this online event with Kate Osborne MP, who's Labour MP, Socialist HB, and Mark Ladbrokes, who had messaged me before. The online event is organised by the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs that we know about. So I'm seeing from that they are allied quite closely to the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs. Just on that point, it does seem that they aren't really calling out the Labour Party. Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer in the last 2 months have been very out there talking about bringing in more private outsourcing, speeding it up. One further point I just want to make before I bring you in is this one here. The People's Assembly is another group that was mentioned by Dr Bob Gill. This is their main focus on their social media. Get demo ready, Tories out, national demonstration at the Conservative conference. Now, I'm not going too deep in saying that their focus there is the Tories out, no mention of Labour, nothing at the Labour conference. There's no protest outside the Labour conference where Wes Streeting's speaking. So look, the background to it is that effectively Dr Bob Gill, they are no platforming you because you've upset them. You've said too much about they're not doing enough. Your passion for speaking truth to power, as was just mentioned, has wound them up. Should you be more tactful? Should you quieten down and just sort of say, no, you're doing a good job, but it might be nice if you every so often mention that Keir Starmer's going to privatise the NHS.
Hi, Crispin. Before I forget, one of the tweets you mentioned presents the fight for the NHS as publicly funded. Time and time again, these organisations never say publicly delivered, right? That is key, publicly delivered. The private sector is quite happy to swallow up public funding, all right? So just to pick up on that point, my history with the Keep Our NHS Public goes back a long way. I was on the executive committee, but it got to a point where I realized actually the way they were exercising control was undemocratic. They actually rigged 2 internal elections. In 2017, I put myself forward right at the last minute to stand as chair of Keep Our NHS Public, only to find that the day before the AGM, my membership was withdrawn, and they posted a couple of elderly ladies to try and keep me out of the Unite building in Holborn. Well, I went to the meeting anyway. They refused to let me speak to the motions that I put forward, my group put forward, because I was the local health campaign group representative. And what were the motions? The motions were one calling to defend Dr. Chris Day, a whistleblower who highlighted preventable death in his hospital. And the other motion was criticizing the BMA on their weak stance defending junior doctors. The other problem with Keep Our NHS Public is it receives funding from the health unions. The health unions, as I've explained before on your program, have taken a position to keep quiet about the privatization. Some of the health unions very recently sold out their members, agreeing to a pathetic pay rise, RCN for one. I sent you a screenshot of a very key bit of legislation that I just want to explain this legislation. Section 75 of the Health and Social Care Act 2012 made it compulsory to tender out all hospital activity, right? It served its purpose at that time to break open hospital services to the private sector. In 2022, last year in July, the Conservative government effectively repealed Section 75. Now, what is very odd is Keep Our NHS Public, the GMB, and We Own It were calling for the very policy that the Tories have delivered. Now, why is this important? The removal of Section 75 allows for private sector monopoly within the NHS. So this isn't about personality or not getting a chance to speak on a platform. Fundamentally, their policy analysis and positions are destructive. Some of the personnel, if you understand, who they parachuted in to be leadership within the Keep Our NHS Public, one person springs to mind, a Professor Sue Richardson, who was in the Blair government as a SPAD, as an advisor, and she was one of the chief proponents of something called New Public Management. New Public Management is how all the public sector has been privatized, where you instill a leadership which does not stop or prevent outsourcing of their own services. So the leaderships we have across the public sector are not interested in the least in public service. They are there to do a hatchet job on public services. So Sue Richards, this former Blair advisor, was parachuted into Keep Our NHS executive, right? No explanation. Now this person, Tom, whatever his name is, how was he appointed to Keep Our NHS Public? You have a cabal of people who are ideologically committed to airbrush history. Privatization only started under the Tories. Well, we know Labour spent 13 years introducing PFI, extending the market, outsourcing for the first time clinical services. The problem they have with me is I understand the history. I spent years reading into the subject. I work every day seeing the consequences of Labour policy PFI, which led to the downgrading of my hospital and the worsening services for my patients, right? I'm not paid by anybody. I'm not paid by any union. I don't hope to have a career in the Labour Party, but these people are conflicted. They would prefer to serve their funders over making the arguments to the public, so the public understand what is happening. Now, I've posted on the chat a link to an article by Squawkbox, which outlines the internal power structure, power struggle within SHA, where Dr. Brian Fisher, who I mentioned on my clip last time, was seeking to basically push out left-wingers out of SHA. Now, that article goes into some detail. I've been kindly invited to speak to SHA groups, and the people I meet who want me to speak, you can imagine they want to hear the truth. They don't want me to censor and airbrush out 13 years of Labour history, or to look the other way at what Starmer and West Streeting are doing. The other thing you had, it was a comment by John Rees that I'm being sectarian. John Rees, I've encountered a couple of times. One was I was invited to speak as a representative of Doctors for Assange. This was a Zoom meeting which he was chairing. And the next was another Zoom meeting to set up a new group, because all these other groups are pathetic and compromised and not reaching the public consciousness, called Your NHS Needs You. And it was volunteered at that meeting. There were a couple of union leaders on it, and John Rees was on it. And somebody suggested, well, Bob, why don't you chair this group? Now, the last thing I want to do is take on more responsibility. I wasn't that keen. I didn't want to do it. What I found out after the meeting is John Rees, who doesn't know me from Adam, doesn't know any of my history, doesn't know my analysis, took it upon himself to reach out to the others in that meeting and say, whatever you do, don't let him be chair. Now, this is a guy who, is talking on behalf of Assange. Don't we know the history of Assange? How smears and false allegations have led the hoodwinking of the British public to turn a blind eye to his incarceration. So this is John Rees. Is this the behavior of an intelligent person who can make up his own mind? I tried to approach him privately. I sent him an email. I said, John, I don't know what you've been told, but here's the work I've written. This is the film I've made. Have a look, make up your own mind, and let's talk. What did he do? He didn't even reply to my email. So these people, their main problem with me is I'm not a coward, and I know what I'm talking about. And every day I'm in surgery, I'm reminded of the devastation caused by New Labour, Blair and Brown, the toxic PFI, and this current government, and our pathetic, weak opposition who are rubber stamping every one of their policies.
Now, look, thank you very much for coming back there, Bobna. I'm going to come into Cassie. Right, you've got a cat to deal with there. Are you right with that?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
This is Loki's decided he's being ignored enough.
Now, what would you like to say? Because you were in the SHA. What's your view on the SHA? Is it compromised? I mean, that statement that I got, that I read at the beginning about being supportive of the Labour Party. I mean, how can a Socialist Health Association support the Labour Party unconditionally when you have Wes Streeting and Starmer saying these things about privatising the NHS? It just seems ridiculous. What's your take on that? And also, what do you think about the way that Dr Bob Gill has been kind of no platform?
Well, it's been an interesting week, hasn't it? The WhatsApp groups have been burning hot this week. I don't think I've ever been so popular in emails as I have the last 24 hours. It's been interesting. I don't think you should no platform people for having a different view to you. I think that's absurd. And this relationship with the Labour Party is a really overdue conversation, I think, for all health organisations. So I was a director of the SHA for a year and a half. They've got, because of their continued, strong ties with the Labour Party, which was alluded to, they have very strict rules about kind of membership and officials and what roles you can be in. So at the point where I left the Labour Party, I was a Labour councillor. I didn't stand for re-election. I couldn't stand on the platform, or the absence of any platform that is the Labour Party now. So that meant not running for re-election in any of those positions in the SHA. And I ran as an independent last time, at the last local elections, which again, because of the SHA having quite strict rules on those things. So I'm not here representing them, obviously, but what I would say is there's a lot I agree with what Bob said. There's an awful lot I don't. The narrative he's talking about is a bit like 2 years out of date, really. It's true the SHA did. I mean, the whole thing about the right being more ruthless and being willing to take any action, well, we've seen that play out in the Labour Party, and we saw that play out in the SHA. And for a while, they had a really tough couple of years. but the left actually won that back, and they have been back in control for a couple of years now, and very effectively. So it's a little unfair to kind of blame the victors for the behaviours of the people that aren't really there anymore. So I would say that, I think that's a bit of a polarized impression we're giving. But I do feel that they are, across the trade unions and across all health campaign groups, they are hamstringing themselves, because the Labour Party have very cleverly and very effectively prescribed any dissent. And it's now at the point where they've sorry, that's my cat is playing with the cable. They've actually prescribed any debate even on these issues. So to stand up and be too overtly critical of the Labour Party risks the organisation being prescribed. And I know in the SHA, the thing that frustrated me was they seemed to spend as much time talking about protecting the affiliation as they did protecting the NHS. And that doesn't mean that that's everyone's individual. Just give me a second. I need my water gun here. And that doesn't mean, I just turn that on and off and it'll fix that, it should do. That doesn't mean that that's the personal ethos or ideology of the people in the SHA. I have enormous respect for all the people I worked with. There's lifelong health campaigners, the majority of whom are health professionals. I've worked in the NHS for 30 years, and clinically, with policy, with public health. So I've seen firsthand how these things are playing out. And the colleagues I worked with in the SHA, the majority had that experience and background, but it took them a couple of years to get back into power. But basically, if you're too scared of being prescribed by the Labour Party, of having your affiliation reduced, if you're under the delusion that when Starmer is in power, suddenly you're going to have influence over them, that things are going to be better, then you're limited in what you can say and do, and how, I don't think what needs to be being said is being said, basically. So there's bits I agree with Bob on. There's a lot of the personality things I don't. That's not my experience. I heard about it certainly in the history. We'd be in central council meetings hearing about some of the journey and what people had been put through over the last few years, but that is not, that's not the case anymore.
Right.
And
I just come in. I did have a message from Esther
can I just
Giles.
one last thing?
One
last thing I would just like to say is, like, Mark Ladbroke is the chair, the chair of the SHA, and he is the biggest cheerleader of staying connected with the Labour really strongly. But that doesn't necessarily reflect everybody in the Central Council, and nor would I think he expect it to. He doesn't particularly like when people disagree with him on this. He's very, he gets very upset when we disagree with him on this. But I don't think he would expect that everyone in the SHA has that view. So I think that's being conflated a little bit as well, that the SHA and Mark are being seen as, like, that the same on the same. This. And I don't think Mark would want that to happen either. So that I think it's important to separate those two things.
Well, I mean, Esther Giles did say she would speak, but she can't this week. So and she's on the SHA.
Yeah.
Now there's someone who wants to speak in response to what you've said, Dr. Bob. It's interesting. It's good in the fact that you kept talking, because it means that even if they say they're not coming on, some people who want to talk will when they've heard you again. All right. So here's Keith. Keith Hannibal.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you...
Yes, I can. Yeah. Thank you for coming on.
My apologies.
Can I just say before you start that the point of this is not to encourage some kind of fight.
I understand.
At all. I just want to make that clear. This show is not about that. I just wanted actually everyone to be clear. I believe that Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting are more dangerous to the NHS than the Tories. And I've seen the evidence of that, and I just don't think that's being reflected in what's been put out by Keep Our NHS Public, the Socialist Health Association, and People's Assembly. I think Dr Bob Gill is a very passionate advocate for the NHS and has been putting himself on the line, and I don't think he wants to argue. He doesn't want to upset people. I just think he wants to speak the truth. What would you like to say?
Well, first of all, my apologies. I actually came to join to discuss about Broxtowe because I live quite near Broxtowe, and because I had a meeting earlier, I got here late and I presumably I missed that. So thank you for welcoming me on. Just out of interest, I think what your colleague has just said about the SHA is that currently the SHA has fought very hard to outline a clear position on the way forward in terms of defending and expanding our NHS. So I think the important thing to recognise, in my view, is it Cassie there, is that the left is always trying to develop a better position. There are different points of view. And the most important thing is that the SHA has a strong view. We haven't got the SHA's view, which is currently, I think, very good. If we hadn't got that, we'd be very unclear what we're fighting for. So I'm a member of the SHA. I have been for a long time. So thank you for what you put forward. It's worth pointing out that I think we need to build a strong movement, and that's a complicated thing to do. When I was chair of Health Campaigns Together and also co-chair of Keep Our NHS Public, the most important thing we did, in my view, was organise a demonstration in London in March 2017. That's when I was chair and when Jeremy spoke. And we got, according to the police, 250,000 people there. And one of the reasons we did was we tried to discourage strongly any sectarianism. And I shan't go into it in great detail, except what Bob has been saying to you is libelous. I chaired those meetings, Bob did speak. And Bob's ability to disrupt the movement has been weakened recently by most people realizing that he's just saying things that aren't true. But I'll just repeat before I get off, what Bob said about Health Campaigns Together meetings, which I know there are some people here who went to, which I chaired, was just simply not true. Bob was allowed to speak. I made sure that was the case. It's just simple lot of fibs, Bob, and Bob knows that. And Bob and I are old friends, I would say. We've had lots of positive things together, but actually the things I turned on to listen to Broxtowe about and found Bob in the chair talking absolute libelous, inaccurate nonsense did surprise me. But I think Crispin, I think your position on being fair and open is one I would support, and I've spoken for too long already, so thank you.
Thank you for coming on. Obviously, I'll let Bob come back in. Bob, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so I know, Keith, what Keep Our NHS Public do is just form other groups. All they are acting as is sheepdogs, shaping the narrative that people, as I said before, they don't want people to understand. They want a selective view of what's gone on. I don't know whether he was at the Unite office. It wasn't a keep Health Campaigns Together meeting. Why have a Health Campaigns Together meeting other than to try and control what independent groups are doing? And that's the feedback I've had from independent groups. He keeps charging me with libel and whatever, but he hasn't contradicted any of the facts that I pointed out, which is Keep Our NHS Public's stance on Section 75. Maybe he doesn't understand Section 75. He can't challenge me on any of the detail, the parachuting in of Professor Sue Richards, her presence in the Blair cabinet, her being an advocate of new public management. He cannot contradict any of the facts. He just wants to imply that, you know, I'm making stuff up, but he doesn't challenge the facts. Isn't this similar to the smearing that the Labour Party do? They want to create the impression that somebody's an anti-Semite or whatever they want to accuse people of. Challenge me on the data, challenge me on the analysis, right? But don't just lob insults at me. So, you know, Keith Venables and the small clique within Keep Our NHS Public have done, they're not in the public consciousness. They have 75,000 people following them on Twitter after 15 years of campaigning. That is a failure, right? Getting people to come along to a big meeting and then not educating them, that is a wasted opportunity, right? Just calling for more money and it must be publicly funded. These talking points are fatally flawed, but they suit one purpose, and that is to get people to vote for Labour, and they'll carry on the privatisation as Streeting and Starmer have made perfectly clear, right? We need a mass public awakening, not people telling us, don't worry, Starmer's coming to the rescue. That is a fundamentally flawed strategy. We need to put pressure on these people, and we need to put pressure on leaders of these supposed NHS defence organisations to say, explain your strategy. Yeah, it's failed. Right. Explain.
Okay,
it.
well, look, I'm not going to. I'm going to move on to Lynn Gunnigal's put her hand up. I've got to move on it totally, but I think I'll keep going till we get some sort of world peace developed over this. How you doing, Lynn?
Hi, nice to see everybody today. Thank you, Crispin, for all the work you've been doing over the recent years. Also, Dr Bob Gill. I've been an NHS campaigner for about 5 or 6 years. I'm totally politically uneducated, so it's all been a bit of a baptism of fire for me. But as someone who comes in with a clean slate, if you like, and a clean page, it became obvious to me that none of the 4 main parties have informed the public of the changes that have been made over the past few decades, and particularly what's gone on in this particular government. So I would say it is disingenuous to call out Dr Bob, who has constantly been campaigning and trying to get his message heard over the roar of propaganda over the years. He's right to say that the current campaigns are failing, although I have great admiration and respect for people who've been fighting over the time for the NHS. We are not getting the message out there. The NHS was divided into 43 profiteering and competing areas last July. 99% of the public still do not know that's happened. That is a complete failure on everyone's part. And I feel it's not just a new government we need, but a whole new way of governance for the people, by the people, if you like, because what we've got coming up in the very near future is just not acceptable to me. And the thing is, it's not acceptable to any of us. So but Dr Bob is right to criticise the campaigns. People have supported the campaigns. Unfortunately, the methods we've tried in the past don't work. Mass marches don't work. Campaigns I've been involved in many. I was out campaigning outside my empty hospital only 2 weeks ago, trying to give leaflets out to the public because they do not know what's happening. And not one leader from any group, be it a campaign group or a political group, I've given that information to the people that they need to know. So that's my view. Thank you, everybody, for everything you all do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn. No, I think it's spot on. I think it's uncomfortable to hear what Dr Bob's saying. It's uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be heard. Trish, I think.
Oh, hi, thanks for letting me come in. I just wanted to come in with something very small and very simple, really. Dr Bob Gill has been informing us without jargon, without anything complicated, with a very straightforward piece of information about what is happening to our NHS. And those of us that have listened to him have realised that we can trust his lines and his words. What worries me very much is we've got someone who's come on here who we don't know, who's on the chat calling Dr Bob Gill a liar. He's been given a platform to speak, and he hasn't given, as we just saw, he hasn't given one reason, as one lie that Bob Gill has given. He's just slandering and smearing. And I want to go back a few years, and we've seen this before, this type of smearing, haven't we? It's not new. I want to go back a couple of years. I joined the SHA in order to vote for a left slate, and I hadn't been a member before, and I joined very quickly. And in order to join, you had to pay money through PayPal, and I try not to use PayPal. In fact, this is the only time I use it, and I do it indirectly. To come on here, I boycott PayPal. So I got someone else, a comrade of mine, to pay for my membership, and then I paid him, and they wouldn't let me vote. That tells me everything about the way they operate. They made it very difficult. I explained to them that I didn't use PayPal. I've got somebody else to pay for my membership, and I have the right to vote. I'm now a member. And they wouldn't let me vote. Tells me about the SHA, really. Tells me everything about the system. It sounds very Labour Party to me. Solidarity, Bob Gill. I would never, ever let anyone, it never works with me. I'm right there with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Trish.
Can I come in briefly on that?
Yeah.
So the situation that Lady just described, which is very frustrating, that used to be a right-wing tactic, that they would create memberships all on one PayPal, on different PayPal accounts, and that's how, because we sort of registered that was happening. That so that's a case of somebody getting caught in a bit of tightening up to try and stop. We were having private healthcare campaigners joining under false names, and it was through the payment system that we actually were able to weed out anything where the payment didn't match the names and the things like that. So it is very bureaucratic, isn't it? It's really difficult, and it just shows, I think, how the legacy of the involvement and ties to the Labour Party are poisoning our ability to clearly campaign on healthcare issues in the way we need to. Because, you know, even today we've spent more time talking about what so and so said to so and so back in, you know, 50, 60, 70 years than we have talking about talking about Wes Streeting's conversations this week, talking about the rolling out of further PFIs. We've spent much more time talking about personalities and processes and left v right, and that is Labour Party legacy. Labour is no longer a benefit to us. They're no longer a political arm that helps us in this fight. They are a poison limb that is preventing us being able to speak properly. And I think health unions and healthcare campaigns have to wake up to that realization that, irrelevant of which way you want to vote next time, irrelevant of which government you want, we have to separate these two things, because it's gangrene and it's poisoning our ability to communicate to the people that need to hear this message.
Can I just say that, yeah, I understand there has been sort of personal things mentioned in this, but I think it's a bit like with the Labour Party. We had to start off with those before we got to the truth. And then the truth is that the Labour Party has compromised the message that we need to put out there. And we're being people are being tribal about supporting Labour. Yeah. And then they're accusing Dr Bob Gill of being sectarian because he's pointing out an idea, not a particular faction. He's not backing a faction, so they're calling him sectarian. I find that a bit 1984-ish.
I think our entire political system is very 1984 just now, isn't it? It's
yeah. Well, I'm going to bring Helen Mercer on, and then I'm going to have to move on because I have promised to speak to Peter Walker at past, and it's really late, and I hope he's not cross with me. We've also got other things to talk about. Hi, Helen. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for a very interesting discussion. And I just wanted to say something very quickly. Most of the things I was thinking of have been said, really. But I just wanted to say this about my experience of the impact of the Labour Party on the health campaigns that I've been involved in. Not the one, I mean, there are some fantastic campaigners in all of these, but the leadership, it tends to be a thing that a lot of them are really obsessed with getting a Labour government elected. They think that we're going to solve the problems of our NHS by electing a Labour government. And I think that has all sorts of quite subtle effects on the way they act. So they don't want to disparage the Labour Party. They don't want to undermine the Labour Party. They don't want to undermine its standing locally. They don't want to undermine its electoral success. And this means that they're very cagey about mentioning things to do with the NHS, to do with the recent history of the NHS, which could reflect badly on the Labour Party. PFI is an outstanding issue, which we had in our local campaign. The Labour Party has got its fingerprints all over PFI. So, well, let's not mention it too much. You know, well, you have to mention it. You can't not mention it, but let's not make it too much of an issue. So I think that it's actually quite a corrosive effect of this determination to oust the Tories and get the Labour government in, a very corrosive effect on the way people actually campaign and what they highlight and what their arguments are. And I think that's what's very corrosive at the very local level of campaigns, however good, however good the ordinary people are involved, that tendency for the people higher up. And they always always get people involved in their own image higher up as well, so it's a self-perpetuating process. And that's my experience with the NHS. That's really corrosive effect of that attitude towards the Labour Party in the campaign.
And clearly the funding has a lot to do with it. I mean, if the trade unions affiliated to Labour are part of a campaign, then they won't allow criticism of Labour, will they? And nor will any Labour-funded campaigns. So exactly. Funding is a problem, isn't it? I'm going to let you finish on this, Dr Bob Gill, because it's better to go back to you. You started this all up.
Yeah, I just want people to use their own understanding that, you've kindly helped me try and inform them of. And when you do not hear about American corporation takeover, when you do not hear about the toxic effect of PFI, when you do not hear about the crucial sentence publicly provided, then you need to question the people who are trying to explain what's going on, because that is the key. We have a system now on the precipice of switching to an insurance-based system. As NHS services are declining and being withdrawn, you either pay out of pocket or you take insurance, and the people at the helm are United Health, an insurance company. Why doesn't everybody in this country know that already? Why not?